How's it going, everyone? This is going to be an AOE rotation guide focusing on the Elementalist talent setup for Enhancement Shaman. If you're interested in a single target guide, I've recently released a video on that as well, and we'll leave a link to it in the description below. The talent setup for this is on the screen now. I won't go in detail on this, but if you are interested in a more in-depth guide on this setup, check out my talent setup video that I'll also link in the description below. Also, if you are running Wind Fury Totem and dropping Swirling Currents or Crashing Storm, then this video will still apply to you. Just keep in mind that you'll want to keep Wind Fury up at all times, even though it's not shown in the priority list. Alright, let's start out here with our opener. If you've watched the single target guide, then this is going to look mostly familiar. We start out with Feral Spirits and then use Primordial Wave in order to apply Flame Shock. It's especially important to make sure you are using Feral Spirit first, because Primordial Wave generates 10 stacks of Maelstrom Weapon immediately, and thanks to the Witch Doctor's Ancestry talent, this equates to an instant 20 seconds off the cooldown of Feral Spirit. Because this is a multi-target scenario, our next action will be a Lava Lash to spread Flame Shock. Keep in mind, Flame Shock is able to be applied to up to 6 enemies at a time. At this point in our opener, Primordial Wave has applied Flame Shock to 1 target, and Lava Lash has spread it to up to 4 additional targets, meaning that we'll be on a maximum of 5 targets at this point. If we are fighting 6+ enemies at once, then the fourth step of our opener will be casting Flame Shock on the 6th target that it has yet to be applied to in order to get the maximum value of our Primordial Wave and Powered Lightning Bolt that will round out our opener. And that's going to be it for our opener. Let's jump on over to the AOE rotation. This is going to assume that you have your tier 2 piece set and that Flame Shock is already applied to all of your targets. Feral Spirits is of course going to be our top priority at all times, followed by using Primordial Wave and then Lightning Bolt, assuming that the Primordial Wave buff is active and we have 10 Maelstrom Weapon stacks. Flame Shock is applied to the maximum amount of targets. Once again, Flame Shock can be applied on up to 6 targets at a time, so if you are fighting 6 or less enemies, then all of them should have it applied. You'll also want to keep in mind that if Feral Spirit's cooldown has less than 20 seconds remaining on it, you may want to delay casting Primordial Wave so as to not waste the cooldown reduction it will provide. Or, if you are at a high amount of Maelstrom Weapon stacks already, you may want to use a Maelstrom Weapon spender like Chain Lightning prior to casting Primordial Wave here. Crash Lightning is the next priority use on our list if Crash Lightning's buff is not already active. The Crash Lightning buff causes our Storm Strike, Ice Strike, and Lava Lash abilities to hit all targets in a cone in front of us, so in a multi-target scenario, it is extremely important to keep this up at all times. Next on our list is Lava Lash, but this is only if we have targets with Flame Shock active and without the Lashing Flames debuff applied to them. Lashing Flames is a talent that causes Lava Lash to put a debuff on targets that increases the damage of Flame Shock to those targets by 100%. So it's very important to cycle Lava Lashes across all of our targets that we have Flame Shock applied to in order to keep Lashing Flames up on each of them. Ice Strike is next on our priority list, and the reason this is so high up is because this build is a Hailstorm build, so we always want to make sure that we are getting those Ice Strikes in for the bonus Frost Shock damage, and Frost Shock follows this, assuming that we do have those Hailstorm stacks to spend. Following Frost Shock, we have Sundering, which is a really great AoE damaging ability that also knocks down enemies. While this does great damage, it's on a 45-second cooldown, so situationally it may be better to actually save this and use it as a CC tool. Chain Lightning is going to be our main Maelstrom Weapon spender in AoE scenarios, and it will fall here in our priority list when we are at 8+ Maelstrom Weapon stacks. When we use Chain Lightning, we will also gain a buff to our Crash Lightning damage based on the number of targets hit, and so anytime that buff is active, then Crash Lightning will be the next thing on our priority list. Now we are through most of the logical part of our priority list, so let's talk through a quick scenario. Let's think of a situation where you are fighting 4 targets, each having Flame Shock applied, but only 2 having the Lashing Flames debuff. We will assume that we are in a hot ham window, Feral Spirit is active, Primordial Wave is on cooldown, and the Chain Lightning was recently used, leaving us with 10 stacks of Hailstorm, but no stacks of Maelstrom Weapon. The first ability we would use here is Crash Lightning because the buff is not currently active and we need to maintain this at all times. We can then use a Lava Lash on one of the targets that does not have the Lashing Flames debuff applied yet, and now with the Crash Lightning buff active and Lava Lash on cooldown, we will opt to use Ice Strike here. And then we can use Lava Lash to apply Lashing Flames to the 4th target. Lava Lash is off cooldown here because again we are in that hot hand window, so its cooldown will be refreshing very quickly. Next, we will want to use a Frost Shock to spend our Hailstorm stacks, and then we can follow that up with a Sundering. Let's assume that at this point we've built back up to 10 Maelstrom weapon stacks and can spend them on a Chain Lightning. And finally, with Lashing Flames applied to all 4 of our targets and spells like Frost Shock and Sundering on cooldown, we would look to use a Crash Lightning here again because its damage will be buffed up having just used a Chain Lightning. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how to read through this prioritization list. One key takeaway from this is that in a multi-target scenario, the management around Hot Hand is a little bit different than in single target. In single target, you'll want to use as many Lava Lashes during Hot Hand as possible. However, in multi-target scenarios like this, the most important part is having the Lashing Flames debuff on all of your targets, and if you've already accomplished that, then the priority on Lava Lash itself will drop even if you are in that Hot Hand window. Now, let's jump back over to the prioritization list to finish that off. Lava Lash is next on our list, but only if we are already at 8 Ashen Catalyst stacks. If we aren't at 8 stacks, then we want to look to cast a Storm Strike instead if the buff from our 2 set is down, and just so you are aware, the 2 set bonus increases the damage of our next elemental ability by 10% after using Storm Strike. Storm Strike itself does not do elemental damage though, so ideally we want to avoid using Storm Strike twice in a row when possible so as to not waste the buff. We now look to cast Lava Lash and then Storm Strike even if our 2 set bonus is already up. I know this seems counterintuitive based on what I just said, but the last 3 abilities on our priority list we really want to wait to use until their ideal scenarios. The first is Crash Lightning, which is good for generating Maelstrom weapon stacks and refreshing its buff, but we ideally want to wait until we have its damage buff from using a Chain Lightning beforehand in order to get more value out of it. The second is Frost Shock, which is way down here on the list because in an AOE situation when you don't have Hailstorm stacks, it really doesn't do much because its damage on its own is relatively low and it will only hit a single target. And lastly, we have Chain Lightning as long as you have at least 5 Maelstrom weapon stacks. This is at the bottom of the list because ideally we want to spend as many stacks as possible in order to get as many Hailstorm stacks as we can. And that's going to do it for our prioritization list. Let's take a quick look at a training dummy clip to see this in action. Alright, let's go ahead and jump right into this clip. I'm fighting 5 targets. Each of them has Flame Shock applied already as well as the Lashing Flames debuff. I don't currently have many abilities available to use. Primordial Wave, Feral Spirit, Lava Lash, Ice Strike, Crash Lightning, and Sundering are all on cooldown, so the only options I have to cast here are Storm Strike and Frost Shock. Now I do have 10 stacks of Hailstorm, so I'm going to look to use a Frost Shock here in order to spin those. So there's the Frost Shock, and then at this point I have 6 stacks of Maelstrom Weapon. I could use a Chain Lightning, but I do want to wait until that 8 to 10 stack range in order to get the most value out of my Chain Lightning. So I'm going to opt to use a Storm Strike here. And then you can see now that actually bumped me up to 8 Maelstrom weapon stacks. So I'm going to look to use a Chain Lightning now. One thing to note is you'll see the health bar here change from green to blue. That is because the Lashing Flames debuff has actually fallen off of this target. So I do want to be looking to use a Lava Lash here. Unfortunately, it is still on cooldown at this moment. But if we go ahead and use this Chain Lightning, you'll see I now have Lava Lash available and we'll want to use that here to reapply the Lashing Flames debuff. At this point, you can see that I have Ice Strike coming off of cooldown, so I'm going to go ahead and look to use that next. And then we actually bumped ourselves into a Hot Hand window here, and you can see this training dummy on the right side, the Lashing Flames debuff is about to fall off. So ideally, I do want to use a Lava Lash on this target here, and then I would look to use a Frost Shock because I do have 8 stacks of Hailstorm. Unfortunately, I didn't actually react to this Hot Hand proc and Lava Lash coming off cooldown fast enough here, so I kind of do that in the reverse order and use a Hailstorm here, or a Frost Shock, excuse me, and then follow that up with a Lava Lash. Ideally, those should be in the reverse order had I reacted to it faster. At this point, you can see the blue bar down here is the indicator for the Crash Lightning buff being active, and you see that's about to fall off. So I'm going to go ahead and use a Crash Lightning here to reapply that buff to myself. And then you can see Lashing Flames is also about to fall off of this training dummy up here. So I'm looking to use a Lava Lash on this after the Crash Lightning cast. So Crash Lightning, and then there's the Lava Lash to reapply that Lashing Flames debuff. At this point, I do have 10 Maelstrom weapon stacks, so I want to look to spend those on a Chain Lightning, and then I can finally round out this clip by reapplying the Lashing Flames debuff to this top training dummy with a Lava Lash. And that's going to be it for this clip. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what this looks like in action. Alright, and that's going to do it for this video today. Hopefully it gave you a good overview of the AOE rotation for Enhancement. And like I said earlier, if you're interested in a single target version of this guide, then I will leave a link to that in the description below.